All right, so let's look more deeply into how to divide surfaces using UV coordinates. Now in the previous video, we divided this surface using the divide domain command, and we could see that even though the UV coordinates were at equal distances, this didn't result in equidistant spacing of our divided surface panels. And we actually then went on to simply divide the line and then extrude the line segments to create our divided surface. But there is also a different way to generate the UV coordinates in a fashion that lets us then have equidistant or equal length spacing in our surfaces. So the way to do that is actually build up upon the divide curve. So I'm going to start with our usual curve parameter, and I'm going to set the curve that created the surface as that curve. And now let me first of all hide all of this and then start by dividing the curve. So I'm just going to use the simple divide curve command, but you could use any other command that can divide a curve. The only thing we need is the points that come out. So I'm going to just add a slider here so that we can control the number of segments. And now the trick is to use the, where is it, surface closest point command. So if we take these points and then find the closest point on the surface, it's of course going to lie exactly in the same spot. So I'm going to take our surface from up here. I'm just going to copy this down here. I'm going to have our surface and our points, and then these are exactly the same points again. And it puts out these points, but very usefully it puts out the UV coordinates. So now we can use these UV coordinates to divide our surface. And to do that, you use the ISO curves. So first of all, we need to create the curves along which we want to split our surface. So we put the UV in and the surface we want to split. And then it creates these lines for us in U and in V direction. And then all we need to do is take the split surface command, here we go, which once again takes our surface and then some curves to create the final segments. Now we need to do one thing to make this work, and that is right click on this and say flatten. And the reason we have to do that is that if you look at the panel, let's unflatten again, right? This doesn't look like the lists we're used to. You've got all these stacked coordinates somehow, and it just doesn't look like what we're used to. So I'm just going to go flatten, and that turns it into this. Now what exactly is happening there is that it's changing the data structure of our objects. And we'll get into that later during the course, but for now, let's just accept that we have to flatten this. And what we get out is a bunch of split surfaces. So if I bake this, you can see that these are now individual panels, right? And now in this case, we could select the rhino curve, which we used to create this surface, but that's not necessarily always the case. So sometimes you need to actually, you've already got a surface and now you need to get at one of those edges to then divide it and then to create the UV coordinates to then split the surface. And if you need to do that, there is the edges command, edge, where is it? Edge, rep edge is what it's called. And you can put your surface in there, and then you get a list of curves. And we're going to be working with lists in the next videos and weeks in our course. But generally speaking, you can then get at the individual items in that list by saying, okay, I want to have the first list in that edge, and then you get a curve which you can then divide and use for your UV coordinate generation. And a nice thing about this method of dividing an edge of a surface and then using that to create the UV coordinates is that it's very intuitive and straightforward to decide, okay, do I need same distance? Do I need same length? Do I simply want to divide it into so and so many segments? And you don't have to faff about with projecting some kind of division pattern on your surface or anything like that. So we've now shown how to do this on a single curved surface. Let's do it for a double curved surface as well. So for that, I'm going to draw myself a bunch of curves. I'm going to go down here to our front view, create one curve, and then create a larger curve above it, something like this. And then let's go back to perspective. And I want to copy this one. And drag it along. And now I'm going to take curve parameter, 1, 2, 3 curves, set multiple curves, and then loft them. Now all this surface creation stuff is something we're also going to cover in the coming weeks and talk about what is happening here. So I'm going to go to manage curve collections, and I think this should fix it. There we go. So now we've got a doubly curved surface, and I want to divide it, let's say, into equidistant strips in this direction. So what I can do is, because I want to divide it into equidistant strips here, I'm actually going to use a different divide curve command, which we haven't discussed yet, and that's a very useful command, and it's called contour. So you can imagine it's a block which basically lets you create contour lines. So if you imagine a bit of geometry, or geography, and you slice it into your different contour lines, we can do that here in any arbitrary direction. So what I need to do is, of course, first get the correct edge, rep edge, there we go. And so so that's the curve that I want. And now I'm going to divide that curve using the contour command. Now the contour command takes a curve which we want to divide, a point at which to start, so in this case we can just use the origin, and then a direction, which in this case we can probably just use X or Y, and then a distance between the contours. So put the curve in, now see if it's the Y direction, and then we need a distance. There we go. So now we've split this curve into equal strips in the Y direction. And of course, it's like all the other divide distance things, this last segment is probably going to be shorter than the desired distance of 5 here. So you'd actually have to go and measure the distance between this point and the end of your geometry figure out how many segments you want, and then determine what the distance has to be, or some other way of getting this shortest little last bit problem solved. All right, well, that's not what we're going to talk about today. Let us now create the necessary UV coordinates. So I'm going to go to the surface commands, and there we go, surface closest point, and we can take our original surface, there we go, and connect the points, there we go, and now we should be able to create the isocurves. Once again, connect our surface and start hiding everything in between of this. There we go. So now see we've got these isocurves, and so all we need to do now is go split surface, connect our surface again and our curves, and once again go flatten. Let's hide the original surface, there we go. And if we now bake this, you can see that we've got lots of little segments of that doubly curved surface, which have all got the same dimension in y direction. So that is how you can divide single curved and doubly curved surfaces by creating the necessary UV coordinates from dividing a simple curve along the edge. So I hope that's helpful, that is helpful for your work, and thank you for watching.